Alex, so much, and thanks for having me and to join a team of esteemed colleagues here today. And as you said, on the actual World Water Day is couldn't be more timely. In fact, the theme I think for this year is groundwater, making the invisible visible. So there's certainly a lot of effects when it comes to agriculture and industry and ecosystems that also affect our climate adaptation. So great to speak today on these issues. I mean, a lot of that's going to certainly tie to current events such as Ukraine, as we all are following this very closely. But as you said, in an age where there are autocrats and dictators, particularly in Russia and Venezuela and Iran, that have grown wealthy off of oil and gas today, and then of course the timeliness of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) report that was just recently released. Again, it couldn't be more dire and critical in what's happening and what nations are doing and not doing these days. So with that, when you think about the war right now in Ukraine, it certainly brings a lot of that truth to home, particularly in the energy sector. As we all know, Europe relies on Russian fossil fuels with annual oil exports about 40% of demand across the continent. There's certainly an ongoing dependency that has created a security risk, which certainly has put a sovereign democratic nation in Putin's crosshairs, unfortunately. And again, as we've been following the war, Putin's economic strategic leverage, with the oil and gas sector that makes up over 50% of its country's exports, has fueled this kind of war machine. I mean, energy is a weapon for him, as we all know and I continue to follow. But with this war, it's certainly created an international humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, as there's been, I think, around 3 million now refugees that have fled, with innocent people that have died. So when we think about this war in Ukraine, that's bolstered by, over 285 million in oil payments that are made every day by European countries, that dependency and that reliance, it's just, there's so many lessons learned, and a lot that we can learn here on the home front as well, as oil and gas accounts for about 40%, I believe, of the Russian federal budget. So we're certainly supporting and fueling them in some ways, even with sanctions and even though their economy is also hurting at this point in time. And then if we think back in 2014, the same year Russia annexed Crimea, and then the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Secretary General Anders Rasmussen even actually warned that Russia was working to undermine European and US fossil fuel production. So a lot of pieces there to that puzzle that shouldn't be a surprise. And then you think about all these other threat multipliers that are out there, with even the Pentagon that called on global warming as a threat multiplier back in 2014, and all the implications that would affect US national security interests over the years that also have these aggravated existing problems such as poverty and social tensions, environmental degradation, leadership issues, weak political institutions. I mean, I can go on and on about the threats of the domestic stability in a number of countries from that standpoint. And then look at, the over 1.1 billion people worldwide that lack access to water. A total of 2.7 billion find water scarce for at least a month a year. And the climate change issues is certainly making that reality worse, as we're seeing more droughts, of course, that exacerbating the situation that lead to conflict. In my past roles in government, we've seen a lot, especially in the Middle East and other areas where there's been these water conflicts, and they have gone up over the past couple decades. You have farmers and herders that clash in parts of Africa over this access to water. And again, there's even these anti-government protests that have erupted in Iran not too long ago, also over water issues. So water sharing, has even become a rival in issues between the Soviet states as well as Central Asia, where I've traveled quite a bit. And even an example would be the Amu Darya River. So a lot of great examples there, but we look back the past 2 decades, a fourth of the conflicts triggered by access to water have been 3 main regions, I would say: the Middle East, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And you're seeing reports, from the United Nations, for example, where almost 2 almost a dozen or over a dozen, I would say, countries in Africa with a total population of 500 million people that face these water insecurity issues. Look at places in Chad and Niger and Somalia, for example. And again, a lot of them will continue to face higher levels of risk because of extreme weather events, which is outpacing these countries' ability to adapt. Again, another conflict with Afghanistan is another example, with over 22 million people, which is over half the population, are also experiencing high levels of food shortages, which we've all heard. Severe drought has also hit that area as well, the country, crippling food production, forcing people from their land. So again, you start to travel all throughout the world and you see these similarities and these themes. And then going back to the Ukrainian war, there too are very much, it's jeopardizing food supplies. Ukraine and Russia are critical when it comes to food suppliers, especially for the low and middle income countries where there's tens of millions of people already food insecure, and their exports were responsible, believe it or not, for about 26% of the global wheat in 2020 as well. So, you know, I'd say a key theme that needs to be done is diversification of our supply, particularly in the energy sector, clean energy sector, that could help protect not just Europe, but Americans from volatile, dangerous, you know, fossil fuel economy with inflation and so forth. But clean energy certainly can be a part of our energy security when it comes to being safe and reliable and affordable. It can create jobs, it can grow our economy, and it certainly can protect lives. If we're able to really feed these diverse energy sources into our grid, it could insulate us from the fluctuations, again, of fossil fuel prices. And as you said, autocrats who wield their oil and gas reserves as weapons. You know, when it comes to the security of peaceful democratic nations that rely in part of diversifying that supply, it can also be done by curbing greenhouse gas emissions and the dependency, of course, on single source fuels. So with that, I know there's discussion about the Defense Production Act and what can be done there. If we can first, you know, and foremost, remove barriers to increase domestic supply, I think that could be very helpful. But the president can certainly use his executive powers to try to weaken the geopolitical power of fossil fuels, particularly abroad, and prevent further mass suffering that is occurring because of these wars where energy is being used as a weapon. It could also be used to accelerate the production of clean energy manufacturing that could cut Putin's finances and help alleviate our dependence as well as Europe's. You know, again, the influence of autocratic countries hold due to their oil and gas production, and that has to end. So again, it could fuel our manufacturing companies with a way to direct and expand production of clean energy technologies, and we've come so far from that sense. And again, with the crisis unfolding in Ukraine, you know, for the sake of humanity, you know, we really need to change course and act on our energy supply chains. That to me is become more and more dire. So there's an opportunity of global clean energy that can affect our economy, and that can be boundless in a lot of ways. And businesses can start to direct, and I'm talking about U.S. businesses here, can be directed to really prioritize, whether it's contracts for materials that are deemed necessary for national defense, that could allow the president to really designate those materials, especially to be prohibited from price gouging and hoarding and that sort of thing. And then just real quickly, as I mentioned and discussed clean energy and how that can grow and help our economy and save lives. Again, it's important that it's safe and affordable and reliable, of course. But you know, when it comes to energy and climate provisions, there's a lot that's under consideration right now in Congress. So it's going to be interesting to watch that, where it could also reduce annual U.S. oil consumption at least by 180 million barrels per year by the year 2030, which is just around the corner. So there's a lot of opportunities and a lot that can be done even on the Hill in Washington, D.C. Lots of great opportunities where our nation's largest investment in a clean energy transition would certainly bring a safer environmental aspect especially to communities that have been neglected, and being able to grow the economy. So, and then finally, turning it back to Russia, they could never become an oil and gas superpower without the help of other countries and other companies. So I think it's important to call them out where we can. It's certainly been a chessboard, if you will, for Europe and Russia, and a lot of lessons learned on the home front. You know, Europe had built its defenses since the energy crisis of 2006 and 2009. Ukraine used to be this energy transit country, and that role has now shrunk. So hopefully, with today's European dependence on Russia, hopefully that will dwindle, and here in the United States we can learn from that, and that's, I think, something to watch the front of with this as this crisis continues to unfold. So a lot to be happening there, and again, quite apropos, especially on World Water Day, where the water piece of this is certainly goes hand in hand with the energy crisis. So thank you very much.